Imagine flying home at 40,000 kilometers per hour, encased in a fiery plasma, knowing that for 4 critical minutes, the entire world will lose contact. The fate of humanity's return to the moon rests on a single piece of technology, and a harrowing secret from the last mission could jeopardize everything. When Orion hits the atmosphere at 40,000 kilometers per hour, the air around it will ionize, forming a dense sheath of plasma that completely blocks all radio signals. Inside, the crew will witness their windows glow an intense white, feel the immense G-forces pressing down, and hear the atmosphere tearing violently around their capsule. Back in Houston, every screen in mission control will go dark, utter silence, no signal. The only indication of success will be the eventual return of that signal. If the heat shield fails, the silence will simply continue. Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen launched from Kennedy Space Center on April 1, 2026, aboard the most powerful rocket NASA has ever built. They are the first humans to venture beyond Earth orbit since Apollo 17 in December 1972. This crew includes the first woman, the first black man, and the first Canadian to travel past low Earth orbit. Their spacecraft will carry them more than 46,000 kilometers from Earth, approximately 7,600 kilometers beyond the moon's far side, farther than any human being has ever traveled. Every single meter of that record-breaking distance must be accounted for during re-entry. Getting to the moon is primarily a problem of propulsion. Getting home is a profound problem of survival. The aspect of this mission that truly keeps engineers awake at night isn't the launch, which, by all accounts, went almost suspiciously well. It isn't the translunar injection burn that propelled Orion toward the moon at escape velocity. Nor is it the 50 minutes of radio silence as the crew passes behind the moon's far side, where Earth signals cannot reach them. The real concern lies in the final 10 minutes of the entire 10-day journey. Specifically, a window of roughly 4 minutes during peak atmospheric re-entry, when the capsule's exterior reaches temperatures exceeding 2,760 degrees Celsius. During this critical period, the crew loses all contact with mission control, and the heat shield either performs as designed or it fails. There is no abort option, no backup plan, and no second attempt. If anything goes wrong during those 4 minutes, no one on the ground can intervene, and the crew will have no time to react either. A capsule returning from the International Space Station re-enters at approximately 28,000 kilometers per hour. While incredibly fast, the thermal loads for such re-entries are well understood from hundreds of missions. Orion, however, will re-enter at just over 40,000 kilometers per hour, Mach 32, or 32 times the speed of sound, making it the fastest any human being has ever traveled. At these extreme velocities, the air molecules directly in front of the capsule cannot get out of the way. They compress into a powerful shock wave, superheat, and ionize into plasma. The temperature on the heat shield's surface will soar past 2,760 degrees Celsius. For context, structural steel melts at about 1,370 degrees Celsius, and titanium fails around 1,670 degrees Celsius. Without protection, the carbon fiber and titanium skeleton of Orion's crew module would liquefy in under a second. This vital protection is called Avcoat. Engineers refer to Avcoat as an ablative heat shield, designed to intentionally destroy itself. As the spacecraft slams into the upper atmosphere, its outermost layer chars under the extreme heat. This charring process absorbs enormous amounts of thermal energy. The charred material then erodes away into the airstream, carrying the absorbed heat with it. Layer by layer, the shield sacrifices itself, ensuring the underlying structure remains cool enough for survival. NASA successfully used Avcoat on every Apollo command module that brought astronauts home from the moon between 1968 and 1972. It performed flawlessly every single time. So when Orion required a heat shield capable of handling lunar return velocities, they naturally revisited this proven technology. Perhaps they should have been less confident. The original Apollo heat shields were manufactured as a single honeycomb structure, containing roughly 320,000 tiny hexagonal cells. Each cell was painstakingly filled by hand with Avcoat material, a process that took months. For Orion, Lockheed Martin simplified this process. Instead of filling hundreds of thousands of individual cells, They manufactured approximately 186 pre-machined Avcoat blocks. Each block was custom designed to fit a specific position on the heat shield's 5-meter-wide carbon fiber skin, then bonded into place like pieces of a puzzle. This approach saved an enormous amount of time. However, whether this new manufacturing method preserved the same thermal performance was a question no one could answer until the shield actually flew. And then, in November 2022, it flew. Artemis I sent an uncrewed Orion on a 25-day journey around the moon and back. By nearly every metric, the mission was a triumph. The celebrations, however, were short-lived. Once engineers recovered the capsule at Kennedy Space Center and began inspecting the heat shield, they found over 100 locations showing unexpected damage. Large sections of charred Avcoat had cracked and broken away in irregular chunks. This was not the controlled, even ablation that decades of ground testing had predicted, but rather a jagged, unpredictable material loss that, in some areas, had exposed layers never meant to directly encounter reentry temperatures. The pattern of damage correlated with a very specific aspect of Orion's return. Artemis I had employed a maneuver called skip reentry. Instead of diving directly into the atmosphere, the capsule first dipped in to shed velocity through aerodynamic drag. It then used its aerodynamic lift to skip back above the atmosphere, much like a flat stone bouncing off a pond. After a brief coast in near vacuum, it dipped back down for a final descent. The primary advantage of skip reentry is precision, as it extends the distance the capsule can travel during descent, offering mission planners greater flexibility in choosing a splashdown location. Apollo missions never utilized this. Skip reentry was intended to be a modern upgrade. Inside the Avcoat, however, it proved catastrophic. During the skip phase, as the capsule climbed back above the atmosphere, the external heating dropped sharply, triggering a dangerous chain reaction. Avcoat produces gases internally during ablation through pyrolysis, essentially burning without oxygen. Under sustained high heat, these gases typically vent outward through the porous char layer. This system is usually self-regulating. However, when heating paused during the skip, the char layer became denser, less porous, and less permeable. Yet the Avcoat underneath remained warm enough to continue producing gas. With nowhere to escape, pressure built inside the blocks. When the capsule plunged back for its second pass, these pressurized pockets ruptured, blowing charred material off the shield in chunks. There's a crucial detail in the investigation that often goes unmentioned. Even with over 100 locations of unexpected char loss, the temperature inside the Orion cabin never exceeded 24 degrees Celsius. The thermal performance in that regard exceeded expectations. The Avcoat was indeed doing its job of blocking heat. The fundamental problem was that the material was tearing itself apart in the process, and no one could predict where or how much would come off next. An ablative shield with unpredictable ablation is akin to a parachute that opens but might have random holes in it. It will probably slow you down, but you can't be certain how much. Crucially, NASA did not replace the heat shield for Artemis II. The shield was already built and bonded to the crew module, and replacing it would have added years to a program that had already slipped from 2024 to 2025 to 2026 due to a cascade of technical delays, weather disruptions, and hydrogen leaks during dress rehearsals. NASA leadership, understanding spaceflight risk from both technical data and operational experience, reviewed the data and accepted the plan to fly the existing shield. Instead of rebuilding, NASA changed the flight plan. The skip reentry maneuver has been eliminated entirely. Orion will now execute a steeper, more direct descent, impacting the atmosphere harder but for a shorter duration. This revised profile eliminates the mid-descent pause, preventing trapped gases from accumulating and fracturing the shield from within. The trade-off is significant. Higher G-forces, greater structural loads, more intense peak heating, and a less flexible splashdown zone. NASA rigorously tested Avcoat samples under these modified profile conditions in refurbished ArcJet facilities at Ames Research Center. They modeled scenarios where the heat shield lost far more material than Artemis I experienced, and in every simulation, cabin integrity held. NASA's own estimate for the overall mission risk falls somewhere between 1 in 2 and 1 in 50. At the optimistic end, that's roughly a 2% chance of crew loss. At the other end, it represents a coin flip. NASA's official threshold for acceptable risk on Artemis missions is 1 in 30. Rick Henling is the lead entry flight director, and his entire focus for this mission is ensuring the crew survives re-entry. He leads the team in Houston that monitors every parameter of the descent in real time, except during the most critical window, when he will be powerless. This communication blackout has haunted human spaceflight since the Mercury program in the early 1960s. At hypersonic speeds, the plasma sheath absorbs and reflects radio waves across virtually every usable frequency band. No signal gets in, and no signal gets out. For approximately 4 minutes during peak heating, Rick Henling and every flight controller in Houston will sit at their consoles, staring at blank screens, and simply wait. During those 4 minutes, sealed inside a capsule heated to the very edge of its design limits, the crew will have nothing to do but trust the engineering and await the plasma to thin. In April 1970, the crew of Apollo 13 re-entered after their service module was crippled by an oxygen tank explosion. No one knew if the command module's heat shield had been compromised by the blast. The expected blackout was 3 minutes. It stretched past 4, then 5, then 6. Gene Kranz and his team sat in total silence, watching a clock and a blank screen. When Charlie Duke finally heard Jack Swigert voice cut through the static, the room erupted in relief. 33 years later, Columbia broke apart during re-entry on February 1, 2003, because a piece of foam insulation had struck the thermal protection tiles on the wing's leading edge during launch, a problem that went undetected. The crew never received a warning. Mission Control only knew when telemetry vanished and never returned. Heat shield failure during re-entry is not a theoretical risk. It has tragically killed 7 people. There's an intensity about re-entry that no other phase of spaceflight shares. Launch is violent, a thunderous beginning, full of thrust, noise, and the raw energy of leaving. The coast between Earth and the Moon is quiet, almost serene. Wiseman even told reporters during a live downlink that he watched the entire globe from pole to pole as the sun set behind it, and his mid-sentence pause made it clear the experience had transcended his vocabulary. But re-entry is a reckoning. The angle of approach must be precisely right. Too shallow, and the capsule risks skipping off the atmosphere, vanishing into deep space forever. Too steep, and the G-forces or heating could exceed what the vehicle and crew can tolerate. The shield has to hold. The parachutes have to deploy in sequence. The cabin has to remain sealed. Everything happens in minutes, not hours, while falling at speeds that literally turn air into fire. Orion's heat shield measures 5 meters across, making it the largest ablative shield ever constructed for a crewed spacecraft. The 186 Avcoat blocks range from approximately 2.5 to 7.5 centimeters thick. That is the margin of survival. Just a few centimeters of a material engineered to burn at a precisely controlled rate, standing between 4 human beings, and plasma hot enough to vaporize exposed metal before the brain could even register what was happening. After peak heating, assuming the shield holds, Orion will still be descending rapidly. At roughly 7,600 meters altitude, 2 drogue parachutes will deploy to stabilize the capsule and slow it from about 480 kilometers per hour. Then, 3 pilot parachutes will pull out 3 enormous main canopies, bringing the descent rate down to approximately 27 kilometers per hour. Splashdown is planned in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego, where a U.S. Navy amphibious transport dock will be waiting. If successful, Artemis II will have proven something upon which the entire future of American lunar exploration depends. It's not just that Orion can fly to the moon and back. Artemis I already demonstrated that. What Artemis II must demonstrate is that Orion can safely bring people home from deep space, that its heat shield can protect a crew under the most extreme thermal environment any crewed vehicle has ever faced, and that the modified re-entry profile effectively solves the gas pressure problem. Artemis III, the mission that will actually land astronauts on the lunar surface, cannot proceed until Artemis II conclusively proves that the ride home is survivable. Beyond the heat shield story, there's another dimension to this mission's inherent risk. The crew launched during the peak of solar cycle 25, when the sun is at its most volatile. Beyond the protective Van Allen belts, a single large solar particle event could deliver a significant radiation dose. Orion does have a small radiation shelter within the capsule, the most shielded corner the crew can crowd into if a solar storm erupts. However, whether that shelter is truly adequate for a worst-case event has never been tested with humans aboard. Despite these challenges, all 4 crew members thoroughly reviewed the heat shield investigation. They saw the photographs of the Artemis I damage, studied the modified descent profile, analyzed the risk numbers, and examined the test data. They understood precisely what a 1 in 50 chance means and what a 1 in 2 chance means. And they still got in the capsule. Reed Wiseman spent years landing fighter jets on aircraft carrier decks at night, an act akin to parking a car traveling 250 kilometers per hour onto a moving platform the size of a tennis court, in the dark, over an open ocean. Victor Glover flew combat missions and has already lived aboard the International Space Station. Christina Koch spent 328 consecutive days in orbit, at the time, the longest single spaceflight by a woman. Jeremy Hansen is a former CF-18 fighter pilot and the only member of the crew who has never been to space. Around April 10th, Orion will reach entry interface, approximately 122,000 meters above Earth's surface, where the atmosphere becomes thick enough to matter. The European-built service module, which has provided power, propulsion, water, and breathable air for the entire mission, will separate from the crew module and burn up harmlessly in the atmosphere behind them. Everything disposable is jettisoned before re-entry: the launch abort system, the solid rocket boosters, the core stage engines, the service module. One by one, every component of the 30-story rocket that carried 4 people off the surface of the Earth has been discarded, until all that remains is a capsule roughly the size of a large SUV, falling alone. Orion will then rotate until its heat shield faces the direction of travel. The guidance computer will take over, making micro-adjustments to the capsule's angle of attack, using small reaction control thrusters, precisely trimming the trajectory toward the splashdown zone. Within 90 seconds, the external temperature will cross 2,000 degrees Celsius. Plasma will close around the capsule like a fiery fist, and then, exactly as promised, the radio will die. For 4 minutes, the crew of Artemis II will be alone with physics. No ground support, no telemetry link. In Houston, Rick Henling and his team will watch blank screens and count seconds. They have trained for this silence. They know that simulation is not the same as the real thing, but everyone in that room also knows that when the signal eventually returns, when that first fragment of voice or data punches through the thinning plasma, every person in mission control will know the answer to the only question that has truly mattered since this mission was conceived. The shield held, or it didn't. 54 years ago, we stopped going to the moon. We had the technology, the rockets, and astronauts willing to fly, but we stopped. For more than half a century, the farthest humans ventured was a few hundred kilometers above Earth's surface, circling in low orbit, close enough to see city lights at night. Artemis II is the first step back. Not a giant leap, but a critical proof of concept. 4 people are flying a vehicle that has never carried a crew around a destination humanity abandoned 2 generations ago,